Roch Longueépée is a survivor and a fighter. His own story led him to his work over the past 15 years, running the nonprofit organization Restoring Dignity that advocates on behalf of those subjected to institutional child abuse. And it's our pleasure to welcome Roch back to TVO tonight. Welcome back.
Thank you.
What is Restoring Dignity?
Restoring Dignity is a nonprofit organization. It's an NGO, a non-government organization. Was founded and inspired in part by Restoring Dignity, the report by the Law Commission of Canada in March 2000, which talked about about child abuse in Canadian institutions. So Restoring Dignity, we work, our mandate is to find redress for survivors, look at the causes of institutional abuse and torture, and to look at how we can redress that. That's the focus, and prevention. That's the key focus.
What inspired you to start this organization?
Well, I was, because of my own childhood trauma, I was orphaned at the age of 2.5 months. My father committed suicide. I never met him. My twin brother and I were then placed in an orphanage, and we lived there for the first 5 years of our life, and the experience there was horrible. I've had serious physical injuries now from that.
From the first 5 years of your life?
We were very, very poor in that institution. We even had third world country organizations like World Vision, who were actually supporting the orphanage
in Canada,
financially in Canada at that time. So, and then I later was sent back home when the orphanage was shut down, to live with my mother and stepfather, and it was just pure nightmare for years. And there I suffered even more trauma, physical and sexual abuse, and torture. It's just been defined by experts, and there's been a number of experts, forensic experts, who've looked at my case. So the orphanage, or the Restoring Dignity organization, was established after I organized a lawsuit against the orphanage that I was in. And because it started with me doing some research online for the investigation for the organization, or for the lawsuit, which I organized and led. And I came across Restoring Dignity, the report by the Law Commission of Canada, and I thought we were the only ones. And then I soon realized there's more. And then I started doing more research online and realized there are people all around the world, and started reaching out and connecting to other survivors. And I thought, wow, we really need to do something about this. So that's when I established the organization. I created the design, the logos, and established the website, and then founded the organization itself.
You said that what you went through has been termed or determined to be torture by experts. Who are these experts?
One was a neuropsychologist, Dr. Aaron Warner. There's been other people who reviewed my case file as well, but they won't give a professional opinion on it. But the ones that have are lawyers out of the province of Nova Scotia. They want to be named because they weren't legally involved in that. But Dr. Aaron Warner's report detailed that there was abuse and torture, and there's a huge distinction between the two types of trauma.
We have some photos that you gave us.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to go through these, and you can tell us what we're looking at. So what picture is this?
That was me. I was about, I think, 8 or 9 years old, and I was in Fort Augusta School in Prince Edward Island at that time.
What do you remember about that time?
It was a difficult time. I mean, I was living with my family at that time. I was very poor and malnourished, and had frequent parasitic infections, was scruffy and dirty, and was teased and bullied because of that. In fact, even at the time when I was in school, I was called to sit outside of the classroom so they could discuss how bad I smelled and what they were going to do about it. And then I was called back into the classroom to be humiliated about that. And it wasn't my fault. It was essentially that I was living with a family that neglected me, and I was dealing with the ordeal of that, and then being bullied by teachers as well as students. So yeah.
Terrible. I wanted to go to another picture.
Yep.
What are we looking at here?
This was my time in care. It was in 1987. I was 17 in this picture, and I had been in a group home for a while and wanted to leave and go somewhere else. And this was an opportunity to go with a family that was very well known, This is Stan Arsenal in the middle. He was our foster father at that time. His wife had just passed away in her sleep. So he'd welcome me to come and live with him for a while. So it was a wonderful experience. His sons were the most popular in our school as well at that time, so it was a good experience.
But you had to leave?
I had to leave because I was leaving because I was still quite traumatized from my own history. At that time, I didn't have the diagnosis of brain injury or PTSD, so I was still somewhat out of control and still trying to find myself. So I traveled.
Where did you go?
I went to Newfoundland and pursued a girlfriend at that time, and then stayed there for a while. And my experiences living there was not any better either. It was much worse. And then I came back to Prince Edward Island. Okay,
we have another picture here.
That's me in the office working. I look a little bit different now because I've gained about 30 pounds, but that's me in the office doing work with the organization.
And what do you remember about that time?
At that time, we were still,
more empowered time, maybe?
Yes, but I think it's troubling because the number of victims and survivors that we're dealing with and people that need help, it's endless. There's no end to it. And I think that's the worst part, is that there's always that feeling that you want to do more. And that's why the organization I represent, we're pushing to call for a Royal Commission of Inquiry in Canada. It's a little bit different from a public inquiry. A public inquiry is voluntary. Royal Commission of Inquiry has the power to bring in forced testimony and evidence, which other inquiries don't have, and that's what we need in this country. Canada and the United States are the only two countries in the world that have not yet had national inquiries at all. Australia is in their 5th one right now, and probably the most comprehensive. They are the one country that's far ahead of anybody in the world right now on this issue.
What do you think a national inquiry would do?
What a national inquiry does is it will bring out the facts. And it's part of this that we need to be in a fact-finding mission. If we're going to address the problem, you can't see past that which you don't understand. So if you don't understand the problem and the history, and you have to acknowledge the history, then the denial and the continuation of that cycles of trauma and abuse will continue in the system, and it has. We're in a national crisis with our child welfare system. It's in terrible shape, and there's been a number of agencies who've stated that. But the whole structure of the child welfare system from the get-go has been in horrible shape and hasn't changed.
We have one more picture to look at, and if you can tell us what we're looking at.
This is a meeting with Phil Fontaine, I think in 2007, at a conference with the AFN. And at that point, we were talking about trying to get his support for a national inquiry. Phil and I both sat down as men, and we just shut our titles down and talked, because both of us are survivors, right? So I have a lot of respect for Phil Fontaine and the work and the things he's accomplished with his work with the AFN.
We actually have one more picture, and this is the final picture. What are we looking at here?
This is a meeting in Manchester. I was invited to go to England to speak before a group of private forensic psychiatrists, the top in their field for the UK. And these legal experts that are seated there are the top in their field for the UK. We also had leaders of survivor groups there from the UK meeting with us, and we were talking about how we were going to be working together over the coming years and supporting each other in the work. And the work, again, is just endless. And again, that's why we need that inquiry, I think, to push for the supports that survivors need, particularly long-term redress. There's been redress in the civil courts, but the problem with that is that they're short-lived, and most survivors are living with disabilities, the majority of them. And when you're living with permanent disabilities, you need long-term supports, not something that's short-term or short-lived.
And I just wanted to go back to Fontaine. Is there any crossover between what happened with the residential schools and what you're advocating?
Yeah, what's interesting is the history that drives a lot of what happened. We have a connection here in Canada with the child migration home children schemes, and the child migrants were children that were sent by hundreds of thousands to mothering countries at a time when Canada was not a country. We were a dominion, to other dominion countries, and they were removed from their own countries, displaced, and then placed into the new country to help colonize, and also to work the land for the crown, for the government. And it was really supporting the empire and the churches. And we had two players at the time, the religious faith were the Catholic and Protestant faiths that were trying to be the monopoly in those colonies, because that is also how they influenced power and wealth for themselves.
Now, have the rights of children evolved since that period? In your opinion?
I had to say no.
Yeah.
I can tell you that I was in Nova Scotia, Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I was trying to get records from the child welfare system there, and that I was told by the secretaries of the judge that they were unsure whether or not they were going to release the records, because at the time, now this is in the early 2000s, at the time that these records were made, I was a child, therefore I wasn't considered a person. So that definition of a child and the value of a human being was again completely displaced. So so moving forward now, we have the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. That's certainly supportive, but that is a convention, it's not law. We certainly are talking more about the things that we need to do about children, but again, I think it's more in the mode of aesthetics and not really in a real sense of implementation and its true value for individuals.
How would you characterize Ontario's experience on this issue?
Ontario, according to our research, has the highest institutional offending rates past and present against youth and children.
What does that mean?
That means that they have the largest base of institutions and the largest number
Like
of
orphanages or stuff?
victims. We're talking about victims. And when we talk about institutions, it doesn't need to be a building with four walls. Our definition with the organization, this is what sets us different apart from many other organizations, is we look at any organization. It could be a cult, it could be a polygamous group, anything that is an organized body in value and thought is really an organization. It could be a people of two or three people, and it still forms an organization. It's the question of what that whole nature of institution does to vulnerable populations. And in this case, this is where we're struggling with right now. We need to be able to push for the inquiries to begin addressing those issues in our society.
What countries do you think are leading the way in terms of addressing this
By
issue?
far, Australia is leading the way. The UK, now it's changed in its political dynamics, unfortunately, is beginning to take, following the example of Australia. But again,
What do you
under
think
the same
Australia is
influence.
doing right?
Australia has had 5 inquiries. So the first inquiry was on the Indigenous populations in Australia. And then when that was over, the child migrants and home children in that country demanded and protested their right to have an inquiry, which they had. And then the third inquiry was modern day institutions. Those individuals decried their right to have an inquiry too. And then there was a fourth inquiry on a situation with I think it was the Miller inquiry. I can't remember exactly the name of it now. But there was a whole cycle of sexual trauma happening in a village of people, and I think it was an Indigenous population there. And so they did an inquiry in that, and the impacts that they found was quite enlightening. But at the same time, now they've been pushing for, these were inquiries. Now they have a Royal Commission of Inquiry, which is what we're calling for here in Canada. And they have implicated, and our organization knew, I knew long before those results came out, that other institutions that had not been implicated in the past would be implicated now. And we're talking people at every rank of government and private sector and nonprofit sector that have been implicated. And so again, it speaks to that point about the nature of institutions and how they've treated people. And the drive is really from that economic force. There's a real prejudice with that has persisted against minority groups for centuries. So this is part of what, as a society, we need to come to terms with, and a commission of inquiry would help to establish those facts. We've seen that happen already with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission with the Indigenous population here. And I'm grateful to see that now. My hope is that the government will push to honor the promises and commitments it's made for the Indigenous population. There's a lot of work to do. What we do know in terms of the redress for any of these groups is we would need a full century of the exact right form of redress before we would not see any more signs or implications of that trauma.
So it's generation to generation.
That's right. It's very generational.
Yeah. I wanted to bring it back to you a little bit more. You were diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
Explain to us what that means.
So brain injury is, mine is a closed head trauma, which there's 2 types. There's closed head and open head trauma. So in open head trauma, it can be less severe because, at least the pressure is being released. When it's closed head, the pressure stays in. And what happens essentially, what happened to me was the trauma is just a series of head traumas in environments that were not conducive to recovery. So I never did have that chance to really recover. So now I'm living with the
And you didn't
full-
even know that there was an
and
injury.
well, I didn't know. I always knew there was something wrong, but
Yeah.
the medical system failed to diagnose me. The child welfare system, which should have protected me from that serious harm, failed to protect me as well. So the result is I'm living with the consequences of their failures, and it's very sad. And so when I'm having to fight discrimination in the system anywhere, I'm reliving all of that again, because that's the reality. So my head trauma, there are global deficits. It's equivalent to if I hit you in the arm and then your skin bruises and you can see it spreading and turns dark. Well, that's what happens in this kind of a brain injury, closed brain injury, is that it becomes like a toxin and it spreads throughout the brain, so it's diffuse. And so you can have multiple deficits. And for me, there are tiny and large deficits. And
What are those deficits?
Those deficits are, the deficits are memory retention, sleep deprivation, which leads to, it can lead to me being more susceptible to infections and disease, because my immune system is stressed from all the trauma, right, still. It leads to anxiety and depression as well, modes of that. So I had to be very careful about triggers. I had to keep a strict lifestyle change as well. Migraines, and there's also issues of balance. I also have spinal injury as a result from that trauma, and epilepsy as a result of that. So I can have mild epileptic seizures, which are not fun to have, and they can wipe you out for a day. So the implications for me are very, very real, living with this every day.
How did it feel to get the diagnosis, though?
It was interesting that back in 2014, January 2014, I had gone in to see Dr. Donna Ochterlony to have a first in-person neuropsych. Now, we had Dr. Michael Reeder and Dr. Keith Sequeira with London Health Hospital. Dr. Reeder is in pediatrics, so he looked at my records from the standpoint of somebody from my childhood trauma, and then Dr. Sequeira is somebody who specializes in spinal and head trauma. So the two of them basically, Dr. Reeder wrote the report and Dr. Sequeira signed off on it. So it was important to have that contribution to it. And then after because I didn't meet them in person, I went to meet with Dr. Donna Ochterlony, who did a report, and she determined it was. But what was interesting for me, I think for the first time in my life, I'm walking down the hallway in St. Michael's Hospital, and I stopped and I thought 30 years of my life has gone by, you know, and I still get emotional every time I talk about it, because it's very difficult, because you feel all the denial about your disabilities and the struggles you've had all coming to that fruition in that moment. It's very difficult.
Was there a sense of relief? Like,
there was
finally,
there was a
reason-
relief, but there's a sense of loss of time and you know, thinking about all the things I could have accomplished if I had known about this years ago, and where could I be? I think of all the things I've accomplished in my life despite that, and I think what I could have done if I had an early diagnosis and the accommodation pieces were in place. Where could I be? What could I have done?
Is it a sense
Gone.
of loss or
It is.
anger?
It's a real sense of robbing. I feel robbed, you know, and it's difficult. And you realize for other people like me what it means for them, and their life is very real. So sorry.
But I think, and I want to say this to you, I think what you're doing is incredible, because basically you're reliving everything that's happened to you on a daily basis when you do this work, but you're doing that work in spite of the pain that you feel to help other people. Because I would think that your work would trigger you, wouldn't it?
It does. I have a lot of respect for people like Daryl Fox, who has to relive the memory of his brother Terry. And Terry Fox was an honor for me, because he had a very altruistic approach to his cause, and so does Daryl. So I have we're friends, and I have an immense amount of respect for Daryl. And I take some of that approach in the work that I do. But I think as well, it's the reality that I'm not going to live the same length of life that the average person will, an able-bodied person. So I'm racing against time in everything I do, because I don't know how long my cognitive abilities will last either, because I'm now at an age where age degeneration sets in, and it's doubly worse than the average person who's aging. We all get that. We all have to deal with that. So I don't know how long I'll have, and I don't know how long I'll survive. I have risk of suicidal ideation. That's part of my history. And there's been times in my life where, things have gotten so difficult, you just remember falling down on my knees and thinking I'm too broken to continue. But I've had friends and people who've supported me in my life I've been grateful to. Pardon me.
And you're strong, you're still here, and you're fighting.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like we touched on this a little bit yesterday,
Yeah.
but I'm thinking, does your advocacy work help you cope with your injury?
I think it's a bit of a buffer. I think it's empowering. And it's empowering when I see that I've helped somebody else make that change in their lives. And it's empowering when you hear people tell you that you've helped them believe in themselves and move forward. Those are the tools that are important that we want to give in our organization to every survivor, every person who's struggling, to be able to speak up for themselves and to be an example to other people, to make our world a better place. If I die and the world was a better place because I lived, that's all that matters to me ultimately, because I'm not taking wealth or title or anything with me. What I leave behind is what's important. That's
Your
all
life
that
made
matters.
an impact.
Yeah.
How equipped are people who have suffered like you at advocating for their rights?
There's many people that are very capable, but many people who suffered my trauma. Dr. Michael Reeder would tell you, and he's read this and he's quoted this in some of his reports, is that he has seen children suffer the kind of trauma that I've suffered. And what makes me rare is they died, I didn't. And that's the rarity and the difficult part to swallow in all this work, and you want the impetus of what I'm trying to accomplish is really to try to drive and avoid that from happening to other people, and to help those people who are struggling now get past that and move forward in their lives. That's what it's about.
Now, when it comes to work, what does this sort of trauma, how does it affect a person's ability to work?
When you're doing the work in particular that I'm doing?
Like any work, day-to-day activities.
It's very real. It's interpersonal relationships, because again, you get triggers everywhere. And so often, most of us will try to set us up in environments where we can avoid those triggers and stay focused on what we're trying to do. It's always a check and balance, because there are times if sudden tragedy happens that you get very overwhelmed very quickly, and then you need to refocus yourself. And so it's important to have professional and community and supports of family and friends. That's one of the things about permanent disabilities that needs to happen in our society. And even today, even for people who have not experienced that trauma and are just living with the disabilities, don't have those supports in place.
And you're working on a song for survivors.
We are.
What's this project about?
The project is, there's been songs written about institutional abuse, but it's been specific and generic to one group. We want something that's more universal, because we don't think this work is going to be finished in our lifetimes. So we want to leave something for future generations to be able to sing. It's a bit like Billie Holiday and Strange Fruit.
Yeah, Strange
The
Fruit.
legacy she's left with that. We want to do something similar for survivors. The name of the song is going to be Burning Cradles, because it's this idea, and I got this from, if I can just read this.
Of course.
And this is from an Italian play, and it reads, "The place that cradled me is burning. Thus I found myself alone, and all around me empty void. Hunger and poverty, need, danger. I fell ill, and Bercy, so good and pure, sold her beauty for my sake. I bring sorrow to those who love me. I was during this sorrow that love came to me. A voice filled with harmony, I said, live still, I am life, heaven is in your eyes, you are not alone. Your tears I will dry, I stand by you on your way and will support you. Smile and hope, I am love, is everything around you just blood and mud. I am divine, I am oblivion, I am the God that comes down from the heaven and makes earth a heaven. Oh, I am love, love, and the angel draws near and kisses you, and it is death that kisses you. My body is the body of a dying woman. Take it then, I am already dead." And
Why does that resonate with you?
it resonates because we're talking about a sense of social death that we all live with every day. When you have a disability, it's a social death. There was, I'll quote just one quick reference from American law, and this was on an AIDS case. And it reads, the federal Vocation Act of 1973 prohibits discrimination against otherwise qualified handicapped persons who are able to perform the duties required by their employment. Although the ruling did not address this specific issue of HIV/AIDS discrimination, subsequent decisions have held that AIDS is protected as a handicap under law, not only because of the physical limitation it imposes, but because the prejudice surrounding AIDS exacts a social death, which precedes the sometimes physical one. And that's the reality of what we're dealing with. If you're somebody who's marginalized, that's what you're living with, that's social death.
Where did that come from? Where did you get that from?
I got it from the movie Philadelphia, which Tom Hanks played as an AIDS victim. But a great movie, but those references were actually accurate. There was a real play, and the quote from On Law was actually directly from the law books out of the United States.
Now, Roch, you're going to Laurier in September. What do you hope to do with that degree?
I'm looking at global studies, possibly law. But my goal and focus is really about how I can impact change on policy and law levels, whether that's being a lawyer or whether that's going to global policy advising. That's the two areas that I'm looking at right now, but I haven't quite made a decision on. But that's the focus. But in terms of the work of the organization, this work will continue. I think all of us are committed to doing that, but some of us will retire, and I may be one of those people that will retire in the future, because I had to consider the impact it'll have to my health, because I am disabled, and those disabilities are permanent, long-term, and they have a real impact in terms of my health. So at some point I had to refocus and prepare for my end of life as well.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Roch. And like I said before, you're one in a million.
Thank you.
And I wish you nothing but the best.
Appreciate it. It's been an honor. Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.